Welcome to Focused on Forward. The purpose of this podcast is to focus on recovery from life situations, be it a disease, chronic or acute, perhaps the loss of someone so dear to you in death, or a change of life patterns that has affected you so profoundly that you have no choice but to find your new normal and become focused on moving forward. Each episode is designed to show the positivity that people bring to each and every one of their stories, the successes they've had, ways that they have become so definitively focused on moving forward. We look forward to sharing their stories, and we hope that they inspire you just as much as they have inspired us. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of Focused on Forward. Today, we're talking with Michael Klann, and Michael has a really interesting story and background to share with us, but most importantly, we want to not only focus on his story, but we're excited to see how, through the different challenges that life has thrown at him, how Michael has focused on forward and focused on continuing to move forward. So, Michael, we're excited to have you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you. And anytime you're ready, just go ahead and go. We're just going to sit back and listen, and I'll jump in with a question every now and then.
Yeah, no problem. So, I guess the quickest way to start is to give a little bit of background. So I was raised with a pretty traditional family, sit down to dinner every night, that kind of thing. Dad had the job, mom was at home, that kind of stuff. So it was pretty normal, and that's in air quotes, of course. My parents came from two different, very distinct backgrounds. My mom came from more of a Kentucky. My grandfather had a real thick accent on my mom's side. And I never knew this about him, but as a younger man, and in my wife's or my mother's frame of mind and her reference, he was kind of a lamp throwing, bourbon drunk kind of down south. Hey, you kids are lazy, get everybody out of bed at 3 a.m. to go up north, kind of family. They had 10 kids, 2 sets of twins. So it was this huge kind of chaotic family background, with this sort of mean drunk kind of influence of alcoholism in their family. And on my dad's side, my great grandfather drove the first car off the assembly line, and he's the one that took the idea for the assembly line to Henry Ford. He was at Swift Company Meatpacking. So we had this whole, and that side of the family was like, living in this big mansion in Highland Park, and the third floor was all the servants' quarters. And so they were alcoholics too, come to find out, but they were the more socially acceptable alcoholics. That was my dad had a watch with fives all around it. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, time for a drink.
So the pinky's up.
Yeah, the pinky's up, the highball glass with the ice clinking, and you're always got a drink in your hand, and you talk a little like this, and it's, very, very acceptable. But the takeaway from that was, here's my mom's family with this, really harsh alcoholism in the background. But then, like I said, I never knew my grandpa like that. So he had sobered up at some point, and they had a pretty normal family. And then he ended up dying of black lung because he was an old coal miner down south. And then my dad's family, though, drinking like that was not a bad thing. So there was this distinction between what kind of alcoholism was okay. And it was just from lack of education, really. So as a result, there was always a bar. It didn't matter if one person was coming over. All the booze bottles came out, and the glasses and the little ice bucket and all that stuff, because that's how you hosted somebody. And it didn't matter what the occasion was. And, by 13, I was a bartender. You know what I mean? I'd put on my little tie, and I'd have fun doing it, at events, at Grandma and Grandpa's anniversary party. I would stand there with my little bow tie and be a bartender, and it was all, all fun and games. So then, because of that, obviously you when you're a kid, a little extra grenadine, and, you bring me an empty glass. My dad always said that when he was doing the same thing as a kid, you got to finish the last little bits of what the guy, had in his glass. And when you make a new drink for him, maybe you make it a little too deep. And while he's laughing at the bar, you take a little sip out of it and hand it back to him. So I was drinking really, if I'm being honest, I was drinking at a very young age, like 13, 14 years old. Not every day, not an alcoholic, just this kid that occasionally drank some stuff. Well, my life was really weird. My dad was a programmer on those $6 Million Man kind of computers. And so he taught me to program from a very young age. And when I say young, I mean like really young. He took me to his office to key in my first program when I was like 7. And I was, writing games and hacking in my, mid-teens, and that was a thing I did. But back in the 80s, being a nerd wasn't cool. So, and this kind of fits into the whole alcoholism thing. Being a nerd wasn't very cool, but being a DJ or something like that was. And I always kind of loved that whole thing, the whole show businessy thing. So I went to broadcasting school. I had a DJ company in high school. I went to broadcasting school, and I got in this whole ego slathered career of being in a morning show in Detroit and all that kind of thing. And while it wasn't something that led directly to alcoholism, it was this party kind of a job. So we would do remotes, and I'd drink at all the weddings when I was DJing in high school. And because nobody asks if the DJ is 21, they don't care. So by the time I was a pretty young man, like late teens, early 20s, I was drinking pretty much every day. You don't plan on becoming an alcoholic, but that's what happened. It's not like you wake up, one day you're not, and the next day you are. And it was this trick that blindsided you, like a robbery in your house. You just kind of end up, wow, man, I'm a little shaky. I need a beer. You realize, and you put that together because you're not an idiot, but now you kind of don't know how to get out of it. So that progressed until I was drinking, right around a fifth a day at my worst. And at my worst sounds like it was short. It wasn't. That was anywhere from 8 to 10 years ish that I was drinking a fifth a day. So Christmas was always a challenge because nobody sold. So you had to buy an extra fifth before Christmas. Hiding the bottles was its own whole ritualistic way to live. And getting rid of the empties was the same kind of ritual. And, I've got a little while alone while my, girlfriend or wife is gone.
So during this time, would you say that you were a functional alcoholic, or you would drink and you were a stumble?
No,
because there is a difference.
There is, yeah. And what's really interesting about that is my very best friend that I met in school, and he's still my best friend now, or one of my 2 best friends now. And the one best friend I drank with a lot, and he drank a lot, and I don't know whether or not he really noticed that I was an alcoholic, or if I could just put it away like he put it away. And he's, interestingly, he's not an alcoholic. He has complete command of his use of alcohol to this day. My other friend also has complete, command of his use of alcohol, but he never knew that I was an alcoholic for all these years. I'm sure he thought I could put away beers pretty good, but the beers were really just a way to mask the smell of the vodka I was drinking on the side. So in that sense, drinking with my friends was, never sloppy for me. I was a very high functioning alcoholic. And when you drink it like a fifth a day, your blood alcohol level is somewhere around, and I'm not missing a decimal here, it's around I was at 0.3. I was in the 0.3 range pretty much all the time. Because when I would get down to 0.1 or 0.2, which, legal limits to drive are like 0.0 something, depending on the state you're in. So I was legally many times past drunk, like all the time, because when I would get down to 0.1, 0.2, I would end up shaking. If I was really getting down to like 0.1, where somebody normal would be drunk, I was vomiting from detox. So I kept myself pretty highly lit all the time. I never slept more than really 4 hours or so.
That's both amazing and scary at the same time.
Yeah, it is. And it's really weird. My dad, one time I was going into a treatment center. I'm kind of jumping forward for a bit here, but my dad, we were going into a treatment center, and a lot of treatment centers are just that. They're not hospitals, and they don't want you to die. Alcoholism, interestingly enough, is the only addiction that can be listed on a death certificate as the cause of death. Like cause of death, alcohol detox. Every other drug doesn't affect all your systems. Alcoholism affects every system you have. I can't list them because I forgot to go to medical school. But, your endocrine system, your digestive system, your, respiratory system. So it's a really dangerous thing when a drunk tries to sober up. So most treatment centers will make you go to the hospital first. So my dad and I go to the hospital. I said, I got a bed at a treatment center. I need to go to the hospital and detox. The hospital was crazy. I don't remember why. So he and I was on a gurney, and we were in the hallway, and they had drawn my blood, and I told them why I was there. like an hour or something went by. My dad's standing next to me on this gurney, and I'm sitting up, and this lady came in, and I'd filled in all my paperwork, and I'd told everybody why I was there. And they said, sorry, we had a screw up in the lab. We need to draw your blood again. So they drew another vial, and they went back, and a ton more time went by, and they came back, and the second one was higher. And the reason they drew my blood was not because they made a mistake. It's because when they saw the result and they compared it to how I was acting, they thought it was an error. When the reality was my stomach was still full of booze and my alcohol blood level was still going up. So the only times I've ever really had my blood taken were either detox or in conjunction with talking to a cop. And it was always above 0.4 or 0.37-ish. So, and several times over 0.4. So yeah, I was a very functioning alcoholic for so many years. When I finally ended up staying sober, I would say in open talks that I would give at AA that I walked between the raindrops for like a decade, because during that time, the functional alcoholic time, when my best friends didn't even really realize it, and my wife certainly didn't at the time, my first wife, I never lost a job. I never wrecked a car. I never hit anybody. I never, I know I blacked out. I must have, but I don't recall doing that at all, which is kind of an ironic thing to say. I really don't remember blacking out.
But it's still, it's amazing in of itself that none of those things happened with such a high, BAC.
Yeah. And that's what was really so kind of odd about that. I came to realize that once I tried to sober up, well, first of all, it's probably worth mentioning that you don't decide to sober up. First, most of the time, and I've learned this from hundreds and hundreds of tables with thousands of AAs over the years, but most of the time you are kind of forced for some reason. Somebody's sick of your behavior. Somebody, a cop or a judge is sick of your behavior. A spouse is sick of your behavior. For whatever reason, you're kind of forced into it at the beginning. I've very rarely heard any story where somebody on their complete own volition says, wow, this is really a terrible way to live. It's very rare to hear that. I've probably heard it. That's probably an overstatement that I've never heard it, but that's pretty rare. So I was no different. I was doing a bottle purge. I was working afternoons. My wife happened to be gone. So I was like, oh, here's my opportunity. So I went around to all my stashes, and I had 2 full kitchen-sized bags of empty fifths and pints. And they were sitting on the kitchen table as I got ready, which is always also a weird thing to do. Who puts garbage bags up on a kitchen table? And I ran around and I got ready for work because, I was running late because I had to take this time to do this maintenance. And I got out of the house, and I didn't realize until I was about 30 minutes from work north of Detroit driving to this job that I left them on the kitchen table. And I couldn't turn around and go get them or I'd be late for work. So I just kind of took my medicine and I went to work, and I worked my whole day, and I came home in the morning, and here's, some cars from guys from my church and my mother-in-law's car, my brother-in-law's car. And I knew exactly what it was. So I drove straight by the house and went and got some booze, and I put that down my neck first. And then I went in and took my medicine. And that was the beginning of the whole sobriety thing, but it was forced. I went to my very first meeting with a book called How to Quit Drinking Without AA. So, I was an obstinate, I'm different than all you people. I'm not the same as you.
Right. I'm not a drunk. I'm just, I just enjoy my booze.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have an unusually high tolerance.
Yeah.
So I sober up, quite against my will, but I do it. And I actually stay sober for, other than right now, yesterday was actually my 18th year of sobriety. I got a little cake thing.
Congratulations on that. That's a big monument.
Yeah, thank you. When we went to bed last night, my wife was like, I'm really proud of you. And I'm like, for what? Because now it's been forever. And she said, for just staying sober so long. I don't know that I could even stop drinking for that long, and I'm not an alcoholic. But so anyway, the takeaway here is that I got caught. I went into recovery with this attitude that I'm going to learn everything about alcoholism. And I know it's C2H5OH, and I know it's one hydrogen molecule away from heroin, which is C2H5O. And, I learned everything I could. And I was going to be smarter than everybody, because I spent my life being smarter than everybody. Some people are more athletic than everybody. I identified myself as smarter than everybody. So, that was my approach. Okay, I'm a brainy guy. I'm going to learn how to quit this, and I'm going to beat it that way. And I did for 7 months. And in AA, they'd tell you white knuckled it. And that's probably pretty true. But another thing that really happens is that you wake up and you realize that the people in your life are hostages. And sometimes you wake up and realize that the spouse in your life is a person you don't even know, because you fell in love with them under a fifth of alcohol. And that happened to me. So I'm living at my parents'. I sobered up. My wife says, okay. And at this time I had a 2-year-old son with my wife then. And she said, William and I are ready for you to come home. And I said, I don't think I want to come home. And she said, okay. And that phone call ended, and I was served papers, and we got a divorce. It was very little talk. So this is where kind of my whole faith thing comes in. I'm not going to dip too far into that. I've been to enough AA meetings to know that, religion is a very personal thing.
Fair enough.
But I'm in this apartment trying to kill myself. The rent was going to run out. My wife had left me finally. I finally pushed her away hard enough, because I loved her still. I didn't want her to be around when I died, basically. My parents had gotten an alarm system to protect themselves from me. My sister hadn't let me see her kids in forever. I was already I was already not seeing my every other weekend son anymore, by a court order. So I had effectively cut off every tie I had. And when my wife moved away, and I knew that the apartment was going away soon, because there was no money going to it, because she was the only one that was dragging us along financially, I could finally die in peace. Well, she's out in Brighton. I'm downriver in Michigan, which is, for those who don't know the area, about an hour drive-ish. And for whatever reason, she was calling me and calling me and calling me, and I wasn't answering. So she just takes a notion, which is kind of out of character for her at the time, because she had finally separated herself from me and putting distance between my unhealthiness. She decides to drive downriver and check on me. So she goes to the house. And because I was actually trying to kill myself, I had really barricaded myself in. The door was locked. The chain was on it. The storm door was locked. There was no good way to get in this apartment. Little tiny apartment we had lived in. And so she gives up and she leaves. She's like, well, I can't get in. So she's walking to her car. Here comes this guy that I met in a mental institution, one of my stays, that we had come to know after that, the two of us. And he sees her in the parking lot or coming down the stairs or something. And he says, hey, how you been? Oh, and they kind of, shoot the breeze for a minute and share a quick conversation. And what are you doing? Oh, I'm leaving. I've left Mike and all this stuff. And what are you doing here? Oh, I'm checking on him. He hasn't answered his phone. And she says, I can't get in. He says, I can get in. So he goes to his car and he gets some, tools, I think, is the way the story goes. And he breaks into the house, and they find me, and all my bodily fluids had released, all my bodily functions had released. It was this mess. And they got the paramedics and saved me. And the really weird thing is I still didn't even stay sober after I got out of, I was in ICU, and I'd been bleeding out of my mouth and throat, and just this terrible ball of awful, almost dead. And I still drank even after I got out of the hospital. But I think that was finally it. It was like, all right, well, I can't live, and I clearly can't die. So I guess I need to figure something else out. And I was finally sort of ready. That's where that whole bottom thing comes in. And I was defeated, really, was what the takeaway is. So that was the beginning of this sobriety that I'm in now for 18 years and 12 hours. Is that, if they told me what to do, I did it. It was not complacency. It was being open to agreement. It was being open to whatever they're going to tell me to do.
More of a stage of acceptance, would you say?
Yeah, actually, that's the right word. There's a spot in the AA book that says acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I find let's see, acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am unhappy, I can find no rest. If I'm unhappy about a person, place, thing, or situation, I can find no peace without accepting that person, place, or situation exactly as it is and not how I would have it. And that notion of acceptance, step one in AA says admitted. It doesn't say accepted, which is a really interesting distinction, because I admitted that I had a problem years ago. Before I was a fifth a day, I knew I was an alcoholic, because like I said earlier, I shook, I detoxed when I wasn't drinking. I had to drink every day. I knew, intellectually, I knew. So I had admitted it years earlier. But now I had finally accepted, okay, this is the way I'm going to be. And I'm not going to do it without doing these things that everybody else says to do. Sober people will tell you how to stay sober. And yeah, I was finally ready for that. So fortunately, I went into a treatment center, and I was in there for, formally in there for 9 months or 6 months. And then when I quote unquote graduated the program, they hired me, and I was able to live there for another 3 months because I was not quite ready to leave. I told them I don't want to go home. And it was because, I had failed so many times in 5 years, relapses that I don't even know how to count, that I didn't want to mess this one up. I'd just given a half a year of my life to living in a treatment center with all men. And I was such a profound drunk when I was in treatment centers with 30 or 60 men. There was usually only 2 or 3 that drank like I drank. Granted, they weren't all alcoholics. Usually there was a mix, there's addicts for other drugs and things. And there wasn't usually a lot of drunks like me in terms of the volume or this quote unquote success of drinking, being able to drink that much and function for so long. And that therapist that I got when I was in that stay happened to be a drunk like me. And I managed to stitch together now 18 years of sobriety, and that's been a lot of work. I had to relearn. The first year was almost spent in treatment, and then my next year out, the day that my wife picked me up to drive to her home in Howell that I'm sitting in now, she stopped halfway at a gas station, I think, and took a pregnancy test because I was visiting her in those last 3 months. I was an employee. I wasn't officially an inmate, so to speak, or a patient. So I was pregnant, or she was pregnant we were pregnant with our daughter that we have now, and she's 16. So my daughter and my son have never, my younger daughter and son have never known me as a drunk. My oldest son really only knew me as a drunk prior to about 6, but it really definitely affected him.
So just to circle back real quick, you said that there's the term white knuckled it. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, and I think this applies not just to alcoholism. I think it's a way that I think white knuckling happens more than people realize it. And it probably goes across all the people that you talk to as well for your podcast. If you're holding a steering wheel really, really tight because you're stressed, or you think you're going to get in an accident, or maybe you're speeding a lot, or maybe there's a huge downpour, and you're just really trying to focus. I remember driving through the Rocky Mountains with my wife, or the Smokies, not Rockies. Driving through the Smoky Mountains going down south, and it was dark, and it was pouring rain, and every curve and every hill was one you couldn't see behind. And if you look at your hands when you're doing something like that on the steering wheel, your knuckles literally turn white. And the meat of your hands is normal color, but your knuckles, you're squeezing so hard. You're trying to maintain control so hard. And it's such an unhealthy situation. The reality is you shouldn't be on the road. You should probably just get a hotel and wait it out. But we don't do that as people. We tend to grab the steering wheel even tighter, and we grit our teeth, and we just push and push. And that phrase, that it's used in recovery a lot, but I think it applies to kind of everything, because we don't often practice for the things that are thrown at us. It's very, I think, rare for people to be ready for these unexpected things. And so I white knuckled for 7 months because I was going to be different than everybody else, which is kind of universal among addicts, but I could do a whole podcast about that. So I stay sober. I'm not with my wife. I meet my wife now, and she's an amazing person. Now, keeping in mind that I was kind of a walk between the raindrops alcoholic for so many years, my first wife enjoyed a high functioning person who had a decent job and who I wasn't in radio at that point. The alcoholism kind of and the egotism kind of got me out of radio on my own. And a real loathing for myself too. That is a real commonality. Believing you're a fraud and believing you're really not any good and you're kind of tricking everybody. Because on the one hand, I identified myself as smart, but I also identified myself as a scammer, and I was not really as talented as everybody thought I was. I was just fooling everybody. I was good at it. So I meet this woman. She's amazing. She's young, way younger than me. She's 7 years younger than me. One of the most inspiring people I think I've ever met in my whole life. She too went through a really weird kind of childhood. And again, that's her show, not mine. So her story to tell. But she was just this amazing, kind of forged by fire kind of a person. She was out of the house when she was 17, and she, had 2 jobs and got herself through high school and just this amazing kind of person. But she was also young enough that she really was dazzled by how awesome I was. And I say that tongue in cheek, but I think it's kind of true. When she listens to this, she'll probably hit me, but, and that fed all the insecurities I had, so she, unfortunately, because of her youth and because of her background, she was also a perfect codependent to an alcoholic. So I met her sober. That was the time, like I said, that I stayed sober for 7 months. We ended up a couple. We ended up getting married. But that 5 years that followed that 7 months was a nightmare. Because one thing that happens that I didn't realize was when a person that's alcohol drenched for that long sobers up, all the control and predictability goes away.
So it's like releasing a spring. You were just able to fire,
kind of
going off and doing your own thing.
No, it was the opposite. It was that the control that I enjoyed, quote unquote, being an alcoholic that was just drunk all the time, and the thing that made it so predictable, and I knew how much I could drink and I knew how I could behave, that was gone. I could drink a little bit and be sloshy, like I heard my Kentucky grandpa was, or I could drink a lot and be fine, or I would be shaking or throwing up, or it was just so massively uncontrollable that that's when my life really fell apart.
Oh, so more, pardon the correlation here, but more of like a safety net then. That safety net was gone.
That's exactly what it was. It's, again, very common. And, once I finally sobered up and had my head about me, I learned that that's super, super common. So, here I was just anesthetized for years, and I just was fine. I could talk fine. I had a radio career fine. I was, I was a okay guy, so to speak, with a 0.3, 0.4 blood alcohol. Really weird. So now I've met this new woman. I'm married to this great woman. I've got my son from my first marriage every other weekend, and a very strained, awful relationship with my ex at the time. And man, it was just awful. This poor woman, it's really only her dysfunction that kept her with me. And I hate to say that, but it's true. And she knows it too. But she's really the person that got me through some of the worst 5 years that I've ever had. And so that in that 5-year period, I was in a mental institution twice. I was in 4 inpatient treatment centers. I wrecked 2 or 3 cars, and I mean really wrecked them. I was arrested twice, and I was in 2 jail stays, not like drunk tank at the Barney Fife jail. Like I went to jail for over a month twice. So here's this just awful stretch of time where I'm sober and I'm not, I'm sober and I'm not, and I'm sober and I'm not. And I want to be sober because the time that I was sober for 7 months, even though I see now very miserably getting through it, just gritting my teeth, I never got any better is the problem. You know what I mean? I didn't drink, but when you remove the alcohol, you're still left with this emotionally busted up person who was making all of his demons shut up by drinking a lot. That's what's underneath every addict, is this really broken, awful person who has profound insecurity. I was an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. So that was tough.
That's a bad mix when you throw in alcohol.
Yeah, it really is, and where it served to kind of keep me normal for, a decade or more, it was really my downfall for those 5 years. And this poor woman just stayed with me. That's why I say we don't have relationships. We have hostages. And at the end, I didn't think that I was going to make it. So I pushed her away, tried to kill myself. I drank 2.5 gallons and a fifth total. And
holy cow.
Yeah. I did have a nap in there at some point. And I say that kind of funny because I drank through the first half gallon. And I was just starting the next half gallon. At some point, I passed out and I woke up an unknown amount of time later. And I was all aggravated because it's the first time I was literally trying to kill myself. And I couldn't pull it off. And I was like, oh man, now I slept. Now I need more booze. So I staggered my way up to the store and I bought another fifth to add to the other half gallon that I had. And I put those down along with coffee this time because I had to stay awake to drink all the booze so I could kill myself, really sound plan. There are much more effective ways of killing yourself, but that was my plan. So one would think that that's a tragic enough story on its own, but it kind of prepared me for a lot of the other things that our family went through. So my wife and I, again, my younger second wife, we've got this daughter, and then a couple of years later, we had this son. And it was interesting that prior to me sobering up for good, we had been trying to have kids, which would have been a terrible idea because I was, not sober, and the poor woman probably would have ended up a single mom, and I would probably be in a box decomposing right now. But my wife and I had several miscarriages when I was drinking, and the first one was really, really terrible. They were early, but late enough that we were telling everybody, and we were, picking out names and planning nurseries and things. And it's a terrible thing to say, but by one of the later ones, you kind of get a little jaded. You don't tell everybody when you get a pregnancy test positive because you don't trust it. And then as you lose them, you go, yeah, that was another miscarriage. Oh, well, and I'm not a welling because it wasn't terrible. I'm a welling because you become jaded. And so we kind of had resolved ourselves to the fact that we just weren't going to have kids. And then here we have this daughter, and I'm sober, and I'm, I got my driver's license back now, and I'm, becoming a normal person, and I'm carrying on a job. And she gets pregnant again. We get really excited, and she loses it. And it was weird because it shouldn't have been really not expected, but there was this unspoken thing in our heads that when we had Evelyn, that everything was better now. And that's not the case, obviously. So we lost this baby, and it was, in some ways for me anyway, it was worse than the first one we had. And I was, anesthetizing myself.
More so because you you felt like you had rounded a corner and things were evolving for the better, changing for the better.
And I'm sure my wife and I've talked about it over the years. I'm sure, there was a bit of, we had miscarriages because you were drinking. Now you're not drinking, you're better. So even though you don't get better from being an alcoholic, you do. I wasn't drunk all the time, so we're thinking it was me. And so, yeah, we felt like we rounded this corner. We had this miscarriage. So she gets pregnant again, and we're trying to have, a sibling for Evelyn. And, here my other son's, 8 years old, 9 years old, and he's coming over every other weekend. We've rebuilt or started to rebuild that relationship. We have a fantastic relationship today. But there's that, there's this sort of trying to get a sibling for Evelyn because now, her brother's, 8 years older than her or whatever. And they play well together, but they're not, close in age. And we know that as William gets older, that's going to become a divide. So she's now in this pregnancy, she's carried this baby to term, which is my son, Zach. And it's about 6 weeks out, a little over 6 weeks out. And she's just having all this pain. And Evelyn was over 9 pounds, and Karen went to a midwife. She wasn't even at a hospital. There wasn't even drugs in the building. And it was a 30-hour labor, totally natural. It was awful giving birth to Evelyn. It was such a terrible experience. She was like, okay, I'm going to go for the good old amnio or whatever they call that in the spine. I'm going to get a spinal, and you know what I mean?
So went from the midwife, and this time we're going to do it at the hospital.
Karen's like, I'm going to have drugs. No way. So
fair enough.
Pretty normal. We had a pediatrician, and we were going, pretty normal pregnancy or typical pregnancy. And we were about 6 weeks out, and she's having all this pain. It's terrible. Well, we found out later that what had happened is Zach had dropped, and he was in her pelvis. And what had actually happened was she had separated her pelvis. So right in the front where there's that fixed joint, that had broken. So she basically was walking around with a baby and a broken pelvis. And so we go to the hospital here in Howell, and they're not really buying it. You're 6 weeks off. You're not in labor. You're just, you don't understand the pain. And I'm trying to tell them, you don't understand. She's kind of a rock star in terms of pain. She knows what pain is. And if she's saying this is a 10, I'm listening. And their solution was walk her up and down the hallway, and not realizing, because they're not going to x-ray her, that she had a separated pelvis. So finally, at the end of the day, they were pretty awful bedside manner, and they end up giving her a pain injection, a narcotic pain injection in her hip. And we go home in the morning, and as the day goes on, she's got a fever, and she's got a higher fever and a higher fever. And I call her pediatrician, and pediatrician says, get her here, or her OB. I keep saying pediatrician, her OB that's going to deliver the baby. And she says, come meet me at Providence Hospital. We're going to see why she's got this fever that's going up, because it was going up above 102, 103-ish area. So we get her there, and they don't know why. And, now they don't know, is there an infection in her womb? And Karen's just now responding to it. And we can't find out, because if we do an amnio, all this infection could spill into her body. She could go septic and die. If Karen's got an infection and the baby's okay in the womb, if we try to do an amnio to check on the baby to see if the lungs are developed enough, the baby could die. Right.
There's danger either way.
So it was risk to Karen and or risk to the baby. And so they're doing all these tests. They're trying antibiotics. They're trying to figure out what's wrong with her. And what had happened was she had gotten MESA, which is, people have heard of MRSA, and she got methicillin sensitive Staphylococcus aureus, which is like MRSA. But this one is sort of like in the movies. You get the bug and you're in a box 3 days later. If you don't do something about it, you're dead in a very quick pace. So she's getting worse and worse and worse. And we got the monitors on her stomach, and both she and the baby kind of start crashing. I'm in the room. No doctors are there. Her mom and I were in the room, I believe. And I watch, almost like drawing blinds, I watch her color kind of drain out of her face from top to bottom. It was really weird. It was almost like the sun on somebody's face as you take a shade up. Only, all of her color washed out. The heart rates start going weird. Her temperature is up above 104. So I run down the hallway. I get the nurse. The nurse and I run back. She checks a couple things real quick. She runs down the hallway again. I'm with Karen. She runs back. And at this point, Karen's got ice packs and everything. They throw the gown at me and said, put this on. You're going to be a dad in 10 minutes. And they wheel her into the room, and I go with her into the room. And they, she's twilight awake because they're going to do a C-section. And I said, well, what about the baby's lungs? And they said, we need to get them apart. We need to deal with two patients, not one, because we're going to lose one or both of them if we don't. So answer or no answer, they cut her open. They do a C-section. Then while they have her open, first of all, Zach cries, which is why I said earlier, without a quivering voice, that's my son, Zach. So Zach made it. They take him out, and they put him in, they're dealing with him in an incubator, and they start calling down consults from all over the hospital. They get the different practices to come down because she's wide open. I mean, a C-section is a huge incision. And so she's sitting there just under, and the doctor actually says, you want to come look, 'cause she's pretty out. She's foggy anyway. She's saying all kinds of goofy, druggy things. And I walk around, and he's like, yeah, here you go. Here's this, here's that. And he's showing me all these, all of her body parts from the inside out. And all these consults are coming down, and they're taking time. So now her spinal is wearing off. And even though the anesthesiologist is sitting there, She's like, I can feel that. And it was, towards the end, but of the drugs, but not towards the end of her procedure because she's still wide open. They hadn't even started sewing her up yet. Her womb was laying on her chest. It was really weird. They had stitched up the womb, but they hadn't, put her together again. And so the anesthesiologist said, what do you mean you can feel it? And she said, it hurts, pokes. I can feel it pokes. He gives her a shot. She goes night-night. And they get the last consult and they sew her all back up. And it really isn't until the next day they realize that she had MESA. So it was a close call, but now Zach's in the ICU and they diagnose him with a heart murmur. And they say he's not right. And they go through a bunch of stuff and he's in the ICU and they diagnose him with adrenal, it's called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And short for it is CAH. So he's got this thing. And what it causes is it's an overstimulated male hormone thing, testosterone. When girls get it, that's how you get the bearded lady kind of thing. When boys get it, their voices drop when they're like 7 and they get hair on their face and they're like these little wolf men. They have tons of hair on their body and it's just kind of a terrible thing. They also have this awful fight or flight thing because it's an adrenal problem. So you have to give them injections every day for their entire life. So I learned when we finally brought Zach home, I learned how to give him these injections. And Karen comes home and she's got a PICC line, which is, for those who don't know, they put a tube into your arm that goes all the way up and through your artery and it dumps out right next to your heart so that the medicine is injected directly into your heart. And she's got this little tube hanging out of her arm. And I'm giving her IV drugs for 12 weeks every 4 hours. I think it was every 4 hours. I'm giving her oral drugs every 6 hours. I'm giving her other drugs for pain and stuff every 8 hours. She's in a bed. Then as weeks go by, she's in a wheelchair. Then she's in a walker. In the meantime, we're going through all this stuff with Zach and I'm giving him, I've learned how to give him these shots. I've learned how to give him this other shot if he goes into an adrenal fit, because if he breaks his arm or has any kind of an action that causes normal adrenaline, it could kill him. So it's just this whole huge mix of things going on.
So just so I'm making sure I'm understanding the timeline. Now at this time, was he still in the hospital or was he home with you at this point?
When he's home. Karen came home first. So I kind of got used to the whole taking care of her thing. She was bedridden. She couldn't walk because of the separated pelvis thing. And they figured out that she had this staph infection. So it was, a very clean room kind of a thing. And then Zach comes home sometime later. And so now he's at home and we're dealing with that. I could talk for another 2 hours about all of this stuff, so I'll kind of cut it short. During that time, I was going to AA as much as I possibly could because I needed to talk about all this stuff. So even though, people in 12-step programs will tell you it's not therapy, it's different. That's very true, but it's still a place for you to share that you were stressed out or, you kind of wanted to drink and stuff. Cause I'm still now, 2.5, 3 years sober or something at this point. So I guess it was 3 years.
It's not therapy, but it's got some characteristics of therapy where there's a conversational.
Yeah,
aspects,
exactly.
correct?
And I was at the time my job had me programming websites. So I kind of make this little family website. I had done that for Evelyn to kind of tell everybody about everything. Well, now it's 2 years later and during this Zach thing, just keeping everybody informed. I had this giant family and I had a really big friend network and I had this other AA network and I had this religion church network and I had all these hundreds and hundreds of people that are always asking about the baby and Karen, and every day was something new. So I created this one web page, and now I guess it would be a blog, but it was literally just a web page, and I kept adding dates and times and things that were changing, and that really helped me. So if you ever hear somebody say, if you're going through something tough, you should try journaling. I hate writing. I hate reading. And that is definitely a thing that kept me sane.
We did that last year when my daughter was in the hospital. We used Instagram and Facebook, and we would post because it was easier to shotgun spread one message instead of having to take the time and call this person and call that person or send an email or a text. And we could, everybody that needed to hear the message was able, we told people, hey, feel free to share this to anybody that that would want to hear or need to hear. It was just, there was a simplicity in it. But it also gave us an opportunity. And I don't mind writing. I used to, I think I told you the other day when we talked originally that I used to write a blog years ago, and wasn't real religious about it, but it was more or less when I had something pop in my brain that I need to get something off my chest or something along those lines. But so I found that to be for me, very therapeutic. Journaling helped me kind of put my thoughts in order.
Yeah, and it definitely was that. And my wife journaled too. My wife still journals, and keeps physical hardcover books and stuff. And she's made journals for each of the kids and all that. And what's interesting about it is that, I didn't really appreciate that at the time either. I didn't realize that little webpage was keeping me sane, telling everybody all these medical updates between Zach and Karen. And then there's this heart thing and then the CAH and this Karen problem and the PICC lines. And then her PICC line, site got infected, and that's all she could go septic because that leads straight to the heart. And it was just thing after thing after thing. And it was just brutal and relentless. It was definitely a thing where life felt relentless. I don't believe in fate, and I don't believe that, that I'm being picked on. Again, not to get too religious, but the Bible says that no bad thing is caused by God. So I didn't think, I wasn't mad at God for testing me or throwing things at me. So when I say that, I don't mean that there's some intelligence that was necessarily picking directly on us. But I think it was just life in general and just the way things were happening. Time and unforeseen occurrence befall us all. And it was definitely that. It was just this mountain of stuff. And that was definitely white knuckling too. Even with the journal and the AA meetings, there was a whole lot of white knuckling where that's the hardest thing I ever went through. My sobriety was the hardest thing I ever did. This thing with Karen and Zachary was the hardest thing I ever experienced or went through at that time in my life. So
fair enough. I can appreciate that.
So we come out of the other side of that, and our lives are really never the same. What ends up happening, they find out that Zach doesn't have CAH. So we were giving him all these hormones for no reason, or hormone inhibitors or whatever it was we were giving him. I really don't even remember anymore. So that's good. He's got a heart murmur. He goes and gets that checked every so many years. That's fine. Most doctors tell us that we would have never known he had a heart murmur unless all this crazy stuff was going on. The only reason we even noticed it was because we were looking so close. So his life kind of becomes normal. Now, he was so young or so early. He was tiny, tiny, tiny. He was, over 6 weeks early. So he's got profound ADD now. He's learning now. He's he's 14 and a half-ish, and he's really managing himself well. But that was a struggle. He's dyslexic, so that's a struggle. His eyes are real bad. And a lot of these things, if you look them up individually, that's a preemie thing. He wasn't done cooking when he came out. So a lot of these things,
right.
I think a lot of the troubles that he struggles with, a lot of the things that he has health-wise are simply because of that shot. I never tied that together, but that pain shot in her hip, right now she has MESA in her hip because it never goes away. You get it on.
Okay.
So she could have a flare up of it at some point because I guess from what we were told anyway, that's where it is. And the way it was explained to us, it's settled in her hip. It's in her, she has it in her bones, and it's in that hip where she got the shot. So, we never had a lawsuit or anything like that, but it was pretty evident that that's what happened. The infectious disease doctor that took care of Karen said that it was very likely that shot was a dirty shot, and that's why she got it.
It was the causal that.
Yeah.
And this was the effect. Okay.
Yeah. So, that struggle, we came out of the other side of that. And a number of years later, Karen's life changed a lot. And the other, several years go by, and she seems to be getting worse in her life in general. Her health is getting worse. A lot of pain.
Quality of life is degrading.
Yeah. Her quality of life is degrading. She ran a daycare here in the home. When my daughter was born, she was doing mortgages, and then once she saw that baby, she was like, "No way." And she had worked at a couple daycares actually before. So she opened a daycare. We have a walkout basement, and we turned it into a daycare. So it was kind of a hybrid between a home daycare and a center, because we had an unofficial playground that was fenced in, and the daycare downstairs was dedicated just to that. It wasn't our living space. And so she had run that for years. And so, some of the pain and some of the aches and stuff, we just attributed to her working ridiculous hours. Because when you're a business owner, you don't just go to the daycare and then leave. You do all the clerical crap after hours, and, it's that kind of a thing. So,
right. 5 o'clock doesn't stop the clock.
Yeah. So because of that, a lot of what she experienced health-wise, we attributed some to getting older, even though she was a lot younger than she should be for some of these pains. And come to find out now, probably the killing of the staph infection gave her a thing called ankylosing spondylitis. So she was finally, her rheumatic doctor, or whatever they call that, rheumatician, I think. He diagnosed her with ankylosing spondylitis because they got it down to two things. They said it's either lupus or AS. And one of them kills you and the other one makes you wish you were dead. So she ended up with the wish you were dead. So it's not going to kill her. In the 1800s, they called it bamboo back. And it's an autoimmune condition where your body thinks your spine, well, your bones in general, but mostly your spine is where it focuses, are the bad guy. So just like your body would build bone around a bullet as a foreign item, it thinks her spine is the bullet. So she will slowly over time have her spine fuse. She's got, I think, 1 or 2 fusions right now in her tailbone. And ironically, they got really bad just before the fusion. And then once they fused, it got a little better. Well, you've seen a skeleton, the tip of the tailbone's teeny weeny. So it gets really painful, and then it fuses and that subsides a little bit, but that's going to happen to her whole back over time. So
this is a slow process, though,
yep,
correct?
Yep. It's a slow process. What ends up happening, a lot of people die from it because they get in a minor car accident, and then they strap you to the board, and the person has fusions in their neck, and they push your head down onto the board to strap you to the board, and it breaks your neck, and you become paralyzed, or it kills you. So that's one way that AS people die. I've seen some commercials. Actually, the lead singer from Imagine Dragons has it.
Okay.
So I've seen him on some AS commercials. I was like, honey, come here. You know that thing we took us so long to learn how to pronounce? The guy from Imagine Dragons has it. So, as she gets older, a lot of people wear a jump drive, like a medical condition jump drive on their neck. They sell them for AS patients so that people can snap it off and go get her x-rays to see where her fusions are if she's ever, in a bad accident and that kind of thing.
That's actually ingenious.
Yeah, pretty neat. Sorry, I didn't turn my mic down for that edit.
No, you're fine.
So she's got this AS, and she's on this pain medicine over the years, and she gets to the point where the next step is infusions that are kind of like chemo. They're going to basically irradiate her immune system, and she would get infusions every month. And we're like, wow, that seems a lot, So instead, she changes her diet, and she, starts eating organic, and she starts juicing, and we really change the way the whole family works food-wise, and she gets a lot of this under control, and she goes off all her medicines, and that did carry her for a number of years. And then eventually, it was that behavior plus medicine, and then the next medicine, and basically, we ended up in the same place. So for the last several years, she's been getting infusions. And they do manage her pain, but they basically are irradiating her immune system. So she's immunocompromised now. So
we understand that. My daughter is as well. And, it's a different level of challenge.
It is. And it's a different way to live, so I went through now several changes in how I live, from, kind of getting it back to me, even though it's, it's not all about you, Michael. But
during this discussion, it can be.
Yeah,
fine.
For the purposes of the podcast, I still,
it can be about you.
Yeah, exactly. my name's on the masthead, I guess, for at least an hour. So, I get through alcoholism, and then I almost lose my wife, which to date is still one of the worst things I've ever gone through. Almost lose my son. We have all these emotional roller coasters. Then Karen has this problem, and she was all state and track. She's an athletic person. I'm the brainy nerd. She is definitely the gardener and the sports person and the hiker. And, she's enriched my life in so many ways that I can't even list them all. And she's really, like I said, she's my hero. If there's a person in my life that I'm the most at awe with, it's Karen. She's really inspiring the way she approaches life, and it's very unique. And she's affected me and changed me in a lot of ways. And so, the way she heads off these things that are happening to her are just really kind of crazy. So she's now on these infusions, and we get to a couple of years ago. It was November 5th, 2017. So 2.5 years ago. We're on our way to our Kingdom Hall, which is basically our church on Sunday. And we are at an intersection that has all these accidents all the time. There's no light there. You're on kind of a side road turning onto a 2-lane expressway kind of deal. And at this intersection, there is a left turn lane. So it's 3 lanes there. There's the right lane and the left lane are the oncoming and ongoing traffic. And the middle lane widens up to be a left turn lane. And we're sitting there waiting to turn left onto this fast road, M59, for those in the area.
I know exactly where you're talking about.
Yeah, it's at Eager Road, if you know the area, and M59. And Eager's this tiny little road, and there's M59. And at that point, it's not very wide. At other places in Michigan, it's a really wide divided highway, and at this point, it's real narrow. But it's still fast. It's a 60, 70 mile an hour stretch for most people, even though the speed limit's 55. And we're waiting to turn left, and I look down, and it's right by our house. So we drive this route all the time. And I look down, and there's chunks and pieces and reflectors and fresh glass. And I looked down and I said, yep, there's shrapnel from another accident. I think it was my son was like, hey, you really need a light here. And we're all kind of grousing about this intersection. And I look to the left and I look to the right, and to the right, I'm pretty clean. And I look to the left, and here's like 4 or 5 cars that turn on their right blinker, and they're going to turn right onto the road that we're coming off of. So at this point, I know that all the traffic is stopped because all these cars' blinkers are on and they're all slowing down. So I start to go to turn left. Well, from behind that set of cars, there was a dude that jumped into the left turn lane, and he was going to just go through the intersection around all these cars that were turning. And I didn't see him. So I look to the left, I start turning, and I look off to the right because now I've already cleared the left. So I'm just taking a double take to the right. And my wife, as I'm driving, goes, Mike, Mike, Mike. She had seen a car between those other cars flying towards the intersection. So this dude's in like a Suburban or I don't know, it was a big truck. And I see, she says, Mike, Mike, Mike. I look back. I didn't brake because I didn't know where the Mike, Mike, Mike was coming from. I didn't know what was happening. By the time I look back to the left, I see a grill. And that was kind of all I see. And I said, hang on. And I took this truck at 60 in the driver's door of a Ford Fusion. And it was an older one that didn't have side airbags. So that didn't help.
Oh, man, that's brutal.
Yeah, it was really brutal. And the kids were in the back seat. Zach was on my side. I did for an instance, like turn away. I turned the car away. When I was saying hang on, I hit the gas, or I hit the brake rather, because when I saw the grill, he was going to hit me in the fender, but we were moving really fast and I didn't want it. I thought about Zach behind me and I didn't want him to hit Zach. So I hit the brakes and turned to the right, and this thing hits us and I probably pass out. I don't remember, but I kind of come to facing the opposite direction and I heard the noise. Well, Karen's head took out the passenger window. So she had a really severe traumatic brain injury. She'll hear this podcast eventually. She's probably about as good as she's going to get in terms of recovery at this point. But she still has, she struggles with memory. She struggles with what people say sometimes.
Yeah, TBIs are difficult because it's. My wife has one. as well. It affected her. She was rear-ended by a alcoholic driver, drunk driver years ago, sitting in the back seat of a minivan, and she got her head rattled around, and so it affects her short-term memory and a few other things, which I use to my benefit from time to time, but that's another story.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting too, because I got a brain injury too. I was diagnosed with a concussion as well, and so did my daughter and my son. Well, all four of us had concussions from one place or another. Karen's was clearly the worst. I mean, like I said, she took out the passenger window. My shoulder got busted up. My collarbone was busted in like 5 places and pulled away from my sternum and all that stuff. And so I had to have surgery, but that kind of recovery is more of a Black & Decker kind of recovery. You know, you go to a surgeon and they open you up and they put all the pieces together with screws and a battery drill, and then you go through PT and
stitch you up, send you home. Here's some medicine to help you get through.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I did go through it with no medicine at all. Hang on one second.
So you went through the process without medicine.
There's where I was. Yeah. So yeah, I go through the process without medicine. So normally they give you that twilight stuff and you're kind of drunk when you're on your way in and you don't really remember going into the OR. But not only did I go into the OR wide awake, but I was like laying there on the gurney and they all got around me to pick me up and put me over there onto the other thing. And, here's my shoulder just profoundly broken up, like really bad. So I was in a ridiculous amount of pain. And I was like, I can get on the table if you want. And they're like, oh yeah, well, sure. I mean, we're used to you being out by now. And so I just kind of scooched off the gurney and onto the table. And, the guy showed me all the parts that were candidates for my surgery. This lovely, shiny set of stainless steel flatware is going to be in your shoulder, some of it. And then they put the nose mask on me and I was kind of twilighted a little bit, but I didn't, the takeaway was I didn't want to feel drunk. I was just scared of that. So I went through the recovery with no narcotics either. They prescribed me one, bless their hearts, but, it was really painful. And I won't discredit that. It was very, very painful, but it also served to take the spotlight off my wife, which is really unfortunate. Because I can predict the weather with my shoulder, but she's still not okay and probably won't be. And that's one that's really difficult. To your point though, about using the memory loss to your advantage. Yeah, I was having a lot of trouble at the beginning too, because I was a brain injury also. So I was very forgetful. It became the most peaceful several months of our marriage, I think, because it was like that whole thing where I told you, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. Yeah, I probably didn't. So
everybody had a get a jail free card.
Yeah, it was really kind of funny. We ended up laughing at ourselves, and my daughter and my son, and we were always just kind of like, hey, what did you think I said? It was, because we were, she had cognition problems. So, you'd say something and she'd be like, the pink dinosaurs in the pool, what are you talking about? And it's like, really? You thought out of all the things I could have said, that was the best one.
That's where I went.
Right?
That's where I went with this.
Yeah, it's like, really? You thought that's what I said? That's the best you could come up with? That's kind of like when you're talking to your phone and dictating text and Google doesn't even know what you said. It's like, man, I know all the words and I still don't know what you tried to type or say right there, And it was like that, it was kind of
sure.
It was kind of funny for a little while, and now it's kind of not. She just went through therapy. Finally, her therapist was like, we both went to vestibular therapy, which I didn't even know was a thing. We had all these different things we had to do, and Karen's still not better, not completely. So now she's got this TBI and this AS, and we are. It's interesting. She's still the most inspiring person I have. So now, cut to as if that wasn't enough, you cut to the last several months. And for anybody who listens to this podcast years from now, we are all at home because of COVID-19. And if anybody doesn't know what that is, then it's a lot of years from now, and you're just not too old enough to remember it.
You were either a baby or not, created during the quarantine. During
the lockdown, So the world's a very different place. And so we're in this place of quarantines and lockdowns. And I've got my wife who is this immunocompromised, high risk person to get killed by this virus that we have and know nothing about. So that's probably the scariest thing ever, right? So we're, and we're in lockdown. We're getting through lockdown just fine,
Sure.
But come to find out that, and for the purposes of the discussion, COVID-19 is like a 2-week thing before it can show symptoms.
Right. The incubation period.
It can be up to 14 days. You can be carrying this thing around. So all of us go into this quarantine lockdown stuff. And at first I was working from home. And we're trying to be so hyper careful because we don't know which one of us might be carrying it.
Sure.
So we're being super, super careful, not because we're afraid for ourselves. We don't want mom to get it. If mom gets it, she could literally die very easily. All 4 of us could die, but mom's at high risk, right?
Right.
So, we're all like just sanitizing everything and not touching each other, not going near each other. And, every piece of silverware is only use it once and then it's quarantined, and we're rinsing the dishes with bleach water and just really going crazy above and beyond. And sure enough, Karen gets sick. And then Evie gets sick. And then I get sick. And Zach is sick. And we all end up, Karen and I were diagnosed with COVID-19. And Zach and Evie are assumed. Both of our doctors, Karen and I, say, yeah, you should just, it's not worth wasting a test right now because it's a global problem.
Right.
But
if you as the parents have it, chances are.
You guys have been in a house for the last 5 weeks. Karen's been sick for 2 of them. You're now coming down with it, or 3 of them, or I can't remember how far in. Karen and Evie had it the longest. Karen was probably 8 or 9 weeks. Fortunately, we never got her to the intubated and dead stage.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, that's a plus.
By comparison.
Now, when you talk to Karen about it, obviously, when we were talking about this podcast beforehand and what it was you and I were going to talk about, I reacted to you. You reached out to me, digitally. And when I read it to my wife, we all were kind of like, well, what does he want to talk to you about? And, I would hope that in a normal situation, if somebody approached you for a podcast that was about going through something awful and getting to be on the other side of that thing, that you would know what it was they were talking about. That you would have had one thing in your life that was like, oh yeah, clearly he wants.
But here you are holding this deck of cards.
Yeah, and it's it's this thing where it's like, what does he want to talk to you about? I'm like, I don't know. Well, is it your alcoholism recovery? I don't know. I was like, it could be the car accident. And I was like, well, it could be, your AS thing and your staph infection or Zach, or it could be any one of those things. And neither one of us, even though we're still in quarantine lockdown at this point and we're all better, we're, now just, we're sick of each other. We're not sick from COVID-19.
Well, yeah.
Weirdly enough, getting sick made the lockdown easier because none of us wanted to do anything anyway. So that was fine. It's like, you're off work? Yeah, great. I just want to sleep and watch movies anyhow. But here we are, you approached me for this podcast. COVID-19, as recent as it wasn't even something my wife and I considered that you wanted to talk about.
Wasn't in the top 3,
huh? It didn't even make the list. It was like, wow, that's
impressive.
You want to talk to us about getting COVID-19? That's nothing. So yeah, it was really kind of funny when you and I got on the phone the other day. I was like, yeah, I really wanted to talk to you before we went into this podcast because I've kind of had, this is awful, but I've had a lot of really terrible things happen, and I don't know which one of them you want to talk about. And when you said COVID, I was like, oh, COVID, shoot, that's been fun. Are you kidding? Comparatively speaking.
And done with that.
Yeah, that's out of the, we're working in the yard. I'm doing construction in my basement right now. So, I mean, the takeaway is, back in AA years and years and years ago, I heard a guy say one time, you're trying too hard. And I was on my 4th step. And for those not familiar, your 4th and 5th step are 2 of the big scary ones that people that go through recovery kind of talk about. And if you quote unquote work the steps, you do a 4th step and you work your 5th step, and it's a pair. And the way the 12 steps go, I'm not going to list them because it's too boring. But the way the steps go is it's like set up, action, set up, action. And step 4 is you made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, going back to as far back as you can remember. And it's literally, people have probably heard about this who haven't been through recovery. It's literally everything you can think of that you've ever regretted, ever, ever, ever. Not things you're mad at. Things that you've done, whether it's to somebody else or to yourself or whatever.
So a list of your mistakes and issues. And
it's got to be searching and fearless. And when they say that, I mean, you write down everything. You write down the stuff that nobody knows about and that you plan to take to your grave and nobody's ever going to know about it.
The deepest, darkest depths of your skeletal closet.
And if you're doing it right, you're supposed to write them all down. And that was one of the things that I struggled with in the 5 years. Like, I ain't doing that. I mean, I'm gonna list some stuff, but I'm gonna go only list the stuff that that I'm comfortable sharing. Because step 5 is you share that list with another human being. Actually, the step says something like we shared our list with God and another human being. So the other God part's usually easy for everybody, even an atheist. It's like, oh yeah, I'll silently admit this. I've already done that when I wrote it down. Well, yeah, you did. That's why you have to tell somebody else. And it's not therapy, and the other person doesn't, comment on it. It's just simply telling it to another person. And it's this weird therapeutic thing that happens where you get all of this crap out and you look at it with another person and you go, wow, that really wasn't all that terrible. They weren't shocked at anything I told them because it's usually another AA, right?
Okay.
So nothing really surprises you when you've heard some of the crazy crap drunk people do. So that process, that hazing, so to speak, was really like a smelting of myself. And I am still a terribly sick and twisted person. But there was a point in AA, and this is kind of what took me down that rabbit hole for a moment, but I'll come back to it now. I was having trouble with my 4th step, but it was during this sobriety. So it was the first time I was really approaching it for real. And I was sharing at the table at an AA meeting that I was struggling. And this old guy said, if you're worried about your 4th and 5th, if you're worried about your 5th step while you're doing your 4th step, you haven't got the 2nd step right. And 2nd step is 2nd and 3rd steps are like the whole God part of it, where you don't even have to believe in God. You just have to believe in some sort of higher power. Everybody's familiar with that, about 12-step programs. Yeah, the higher power thing, where, whether it's God or nature or your own self, some people's higher power is themselves, you've got to believe that there's something greater than you that can restore you to sanity. And the guy was right. He said, if you're worried about your 4th and 5th step, then you haven't really turned your life over to whatever your higher power is, because you wouldn't care. And he said, it's like a cat. And this was the illustration that I still remember today. He says, if a cat chases its tail, like you're chasing sobriety, it'll never catch it. But if the cat puts one foot in front of the other and just walks purposefully in the direction they're supposed to walk, that tail will follow them everywhere they go. Quit chasing your own sobriety.
That's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, it was really, it was super profound. Yeah, it was a thing that I didn't expect. And I had been to hundreds of AA meetings. I mean, by this time, I had been sober a couple years and I was still trying to work. Well, I've been sober at least a year and I'm still trying to work these steps and I'm stuck on 4 and there's 12. You know what I mean?
Right.
And once he said that, it was this moment of kind of like, aha, it was, oh yeah, I just need to kind of get through stuff, but not white knuckling. It was different. It was, another thing I heard in the program was do the next right thing. And I heard it recently in a non-recovery sense too, on a TV commercial or something. And you just do the next right thing. You just keep doing the next right thing. And I have always kind of tied that phrase into the cat, is it just keep doing whatever the next right thing is. And what it causes you to do is, if you're in your car and when you're learning to drive, you glance up at your mirror and you glance at your side mirrors, but you're watching the road. And you're taught in driver's ed, and it's fresh in my memory because my daughter just, she's driving now. She's got her first job at Taco Bell, and she just learned to drive. And there's that whole point where you're driving with your kid and you're kind of teaching them. Well, obviously you got to glance at those mirrors, and you got to glance at them all the time. So when we're teaching Evie, there's these teaching moments, and Karen's really good at teaching the kids to drive. That's not my job. She's done that. And you check your mirror quickly, but that's it. And you don't linger in it, because if you're looking in the rearview mirror, you're going to really wreck the future. You're going to get in a car accident. You're going to hit a person or a dog or a tree. You cannot look at it, but you have to be aware of it. And that was a thing I took forward from the program too, was you cannot regret the past. Actually, it says we, and this is from Narcotics Anonymous, I believe, if I remember right. We will not regret the past, but aren't willing to shut the door on it. And that's a double-edged coin that you really have to kind of digest. You can't regret, if you regret the things you've done and you drag them like drayage behind you, you're never going to get anywhere either. And
no, it's dead weight that's going to hold you down.
And if you're still bitter that you're in the situation you're in, my dad's a diabetic. He came over yesterday. I love my father. He's taught me so many life lessons. Life's about the what and the when, the how's in a book. He taught me that about computers and software. Mm-hmm. But it is about the what and the when. What are you going to do and when you're going to do it? The how to live your life, in my case, is in the Bible. There's Bible principles all through the whole book, and that's how I live my life. For a person in recovery, you get a lot of other things to live, whether it's in the AA book or the AA Big Book or the NA book, or whatever 12-step program you're in. You pick up other things from those books, right? If you're a ecology kind of guy and a big heady thinker, maybe it's philosophy, maybe it's your family, but you learn these things from other people's experience. You learn these things from books. You learn these things. So, life is about the what and the when, what you're doing with all this crap. But the how's been written already 1,000,000 times over.
Correct.
It's been written. It's done. So anything that we're struggling with, it's only as far as looking at the next person that's that struggled, past tense, with the same thing, and they're not doing it anymore. They're not in the craziness anymore. If you're living in the insanity, then you're crazy. There was a guy named Wayne Dyer. My dad was a Dale Carnegie trainer when I was growing up. So I learned his, all my speech eloquence and stuff that I have. I say tongue in cheeky because I keep sitting here clearing my throat. I get all of that from him too. He was very good at teaching me to present myself and to talk and to be cohesive in my thoughts and all that stuff. And he taught me all these lessons without even realizing that he was teaching me. So that kind of stuff is stuff that I didn't realize until I got sober and until I got past Karen and Zachary and until we got past the car accident. And I keep kind of relearning the same things over and over and over. But it's really a reaffirmation of things we've already learned. So you can't regret the past, but you shouldn't shut the door on it either. You still have to keep glancing in the mirror. And like I said, my dad's a diabetic now, and he's still teaching me because he came over. We were celebrating my 18 years of sobriety. I didn't know that, they were going to necessarily bring a cake with candles on it. And it was pretty fun. But my dad grabbed his insulin, and he took some insulin, and he shared a dessert with me, and he took some extra insulin because this was super, super sweet. And it had buttercream frosting that was amazing. But
sounds wonderful.
But it was, it was another example of, he didn't ask to be a diabetic, but he's not going to sit here and be bitter about it because he wouldn't have enjoyed the evening. He's just going to take a little extra insulin this one time because I'm going to pretend he never does that. And make do. And I can't drink. So when I got married to my second wife, I had, I think it was Sprite maybe, so it was bubbly, and she had champagne, and we had our little glasses at the head table, and I didn't look weird because I didn't have a drink in front of me. And, it's just this thing. And you get the acceptance part is when you realize that you're not mad at why you had happen whatever happened. And that's really you can't be happy on the other side of a tragedy if you don't accept that the tragedy just happened because it did, and it doesn't matter who or what caused it. Does not matter. It's
right.
meaningless. This is where
that took me a little while to get to, and that's, part of the stuff that you're talking about is also some of the stuff that I talked with our therapist, because we went in and trying to delve in and kind of figure out some of these things. And so even though I wasn't going through AA and things along those lines, some of the talking points are very much the same, because there has to be an acceptance of what you've gone through, and and to know that that's always going to be in your rear view. But the way that she put it was, she used the word linger. If you linger in the rear view, it causes the crash in your front view.
Yeah, and that's probably a good way to say it, is linger. You can't shut the door on it, like NA tells their people. You can't shut the door on it. You got to keep an eye on it. If I didn't,
it's part of who you are.
It's who you are. I mean, people, when they start celebrating your sobriety early on, you feel weird about it, because it's like, oh yeah, you're congratulating me for not being drunk all the time, for not wrecking cars, for not stealing money from my wife's purse, for not yelling when I shouldn't yell, for, what I mean? You're congratulating me for being what you already are every day, a functioning grown-up,
right, for being a functioning human being. So yeah,
person.
So
yay me, really, because I'm acting like you've always acted. Great, so you don't feel kind of good about it, but you're also trying a lot more in those early years. So it's this reversal that happens. Now I appreciate when I get the cake, and I'm not trying hardly at all. I mean, I say hardly at all. I don't try to stay sober anymore, because to your point, you use the perfect words. It's just who I am now. I just don't drink anything. I can make drinks for people. I can smell wine on my fingers because I pulled the cork out for my wife, and it does not bug me. There are still things that will make me think about drinking, but the option isn't there anymore. It's a curious thought, and I'm very, very aware that if I start drinking again, I'll probably die, because my body's just not going to own it. So there's some have-tos still, but I'm not white knuckling my way through life anymore.
But it's an acceptance of your limitations.
Yeah, it's an acceptance of limitations. It's watching my wife again. She's got this autoimmune disease. She's got, just so many things that have gone wrong for this poor woman. And she smiles, and she's a great teacher with my kids. Even when they go to regular schools, they're not homeschooled, but when they're here, everything's a teaching moment. And she gardens, and she cans, and she does organic stuff, and she feeds us well, and she learns new recipes, and she's just constantly being a better person all the time. And the reason I think she inspires me so much is because I went as far as being a person. That's about where I kind of stopped. It's like, okay, I'm not awful anymore. Good. That's as far as I kind of took myself. I hope I'm getting better as I get older. Getting closer to my higher power, so to speak, and being a more spiritual man as I get older, and being a better parent as I get older. I hope I'm improving, but I still look at me compared to Karen. I'm a joke. I got as, I went as far as not, lying and cheating everybody all the time. I'm a brutally honest person all the time, which means I'm also probably pretty tactless and careless a lot of the time. So I kind of inherited new flaws along with all of the hard stuff we went through and all the skills that we got. Because it does harden you, over things.
Well, it gives. I found that some of these experiences in life also give you a new way of looking at things, and it creates a new sense of humor. To where things that you may not have found funny before are now funny. And I call it a dark humor, so to speak. Just because you have to have a level of going back again to a level of acceptance for it, and just going, okay, well, this is if I don't laugh about it, I'm going to lose my mind.
Yeah, that's extremely insightful, actually, that you pointed that out, because it's true. It is true. I mean, the older I got and the more things that we've gone through, even my kids, I've noticed that my kids lately have a very dark kind of humor. Karen almost kind of recoils sometimes. And you're right. When you get real close to dying, joking about dying is a lot easier. And for what would be taboo to somebody else, I often say things that people kind of gasp at a little bit, and it's just because
that's my daughter.
Oh, right, and because she went through it on the other side from where you were. You know what I mean? It's kind of
right.
like in Karen and Zachary's situation. I'm you, and they are your daughter. It was awful for you. Well, what was it like for her? I mean, she's got to learn that, she's got to deal with being an immunocompromised person from now on, and that's not, she's going to have to get there and be able to laugh at stuff that other people would go, oh my gosh, that was uncomfortable that you joked about that.
She's made a few jokes even with our doctor, and the doctor kind of looked at us and like, well, hey, it's her life, her experience. If she wants to joke about it,
yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
Tell her no.
And
so that's how she copes.
And, I mean, the whole world is talking about new normal on the other side of COVID, but everything we do creates a new normal, even little stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of our catchphrase, I think, now is that, we're always, every day we're discovering a new normal. There's something different that we have to tweak and do differently because of life situations.
And I really, when you invited me to talk today, I checked out your podcast and stuff, and I think that it's a fantastic service, I guess, that you're doing, because podcasts are so accessible and so kind of universal for everybody. You can find a podcast about the one exact weird thing that you're interested in, and this is the opposite of that. I think that you don't have to have gone through a terrible thing, or lots of them like we have, to be able to benefit. I said earlier about, the how's in a book. Well, the how is in our friends. It's in our church. It's in our God. It's in our Bible, or whatever that is. It's in our community. It's in our children. The way your daughter handles what she's handling.
Yeah.
If you go through something later, hopefully not, but if you do, you're going to draw from watching her. So, we can either
absolutely.
learn from that, just like me with AA. I was doing Mike's Anonymous for 5 years, and it was awful. I wrecked a ton of cars, and I had a lot of inpatient stays and almost died more than once. Or I can do it, at that, in my case, it was like I can do it like the book says to do it, and I can stay sober, because they literally promise it. It's like everybody that does this will stay sober. If you do these things, you'll stay sober. And now I believe that. And I'm not even doing AA anymore. I'm many years from AA, having attended it. But it's true. You just go look at somebody else that's done it and figure out how they did it and do what they do. It's so simple. When it's the problem is when we're going through something, we're too close to it to realize that it's that easy.
Yeah. The expression, you can't see the forest for the trees, is where it comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't see the simplicity in front of you because you've, and a lot of times when, with my kids as they were growing up, whenever they were faced with an issue, and as a matter of fact, I was just talking to my son the other night, he's newly married, trying to decipher a lot of things going on in life, and work in this COVID situation, and he's got cars that are giving him issues and fits, and all these, both cars broke down at once, and there's this issue and that issue, and as I used to tell him when he was little, I'm like, instead of looking at it all as one big issue, find the small piece that you can adjust, that you can control, and fix that piece, and then build from there. Instead of trying to tackle it all at once, find the controllable piece that will give you some semblance of sanity, and then move forward from there. And that's kind of how we approached things last year with my daughter too. Is that okay? We have this massive issue in front of us. What are the small things that we can control? How do we push forward? How do we stay focused on that?
Yeah. And it really is. I wrote on a whiteboard next to my desk at work that I haven't seen in 2.5 or 3 months. Progress is about doing a bunch of little things, not about doing one big thing. because I was having trouble
Agreed.
just approaching. I handle auto shows for work, and getting an auto show stand together for someone for a company is this massive, many millions of dollars process. And I learned from this company that basically the professional way to do the things that I learned how to do in my personal life. I was too stupid to apply it. I was like, holy cow. I come home when I first got this job many years ago. I came home and I was like, honey, I'm making up budgets that I don't even understand how it's going to work in the end. It's like freaking me out. I budgeted $8 million worth of stuff today and of somebody else's money, and I don't even know if it's right. It's, I was really freaking out, but it is. It's how to eat an elephant. It's the one bite at a time. Little measurable increments.
Exactly.
I learned German on the way to and from work because I have about an hour and a half commute each way, and so instead of listening to music or go crazy because of the traffic, I listen to German. So, you know what I mean? Little incremental
there you go.
things. Yeah.
Budgeting your time. Yeah. So if you could sum all of life's experiences into is there one thing that helps you? Because, when everybody that we've talked to, we always find one thing that they've gone through or has helped them. What has helped you to remain focused on moving forward?
So the two things that I'm struggling with, I'm just going to tell you what both of them are, because I can't seem to separate them.
Okay.
The first one is the one that, is such a big thing that I pulled forward from recovery, which is acceptance. Every time I've hit a challenge in life, I always boil back to acceptance, even if it's being mad at somebody. If I'm mad at somebody, it's usually fear-based, which is really weird. If I really dissect why I'm mad at them, I'm afraid they're not going to do something for me. I'm afraid that I'm going to fail at something because of something they did. I'm afraid some bad thing's going to happen because of what they're doing. It's almost always fear-based, and it's almost always because I'm not accepting the situation or the person. The person, place, thing, or situation, I'm not accepting it for what it is. That's one of the biggest things.
Okay.
When you get a challenge, you have to just accept that that's there. Being mad about why you're there doesn't help anybody, including you. But the other thing is, my ice just dropped, so I'm going to start that sentence again. Take two. Told you I'm right next to the kitchen.
No worries at all.
So the other thing is humility. You have to be humble enough to know you need help. You have to be humble enough to look for a way to do things different than what you think is the best way. Most of the time when something terrible happens to us, it's the first time it's ever happened to us, or it wouldn't be that terrible. If we have to deal with a gunshot wound, we're going to freak out and we're going to handle it however our adrenaline lets us handle it. But somebody who's in an ER, they know how to deal with those all the time because they just, yep, we had 2 gunshot wounds today. It was kind of a heavy night at work. Well, when we have something terrible happen to us, we have to be humble enough to realize it's awful for us because we've never done this before. So blogging, asking people in a group setting that's gone through whatever you've gone through, just hearing people be bummed out and mad at all the same things you're bummed out and mad at. The scriptures say there's a wisdom in the multitude of counselors, and it's true. Not everybody's going to have gems of priceless advice, but sometimes it's just as simple as being humble enough to know you need help to get through it. And I don't know how to really separate the humility from the acceptance. I'm sorry I gave you 2 answers to your
that's
one
good.
question, but I don't think
it's multifaceted. I think
yeah.
I think they go hand in hand personally.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a way to separate those 2 things. I don't know that just one of them will do the job.
No, that's okay. No, I get the sense that we could talk for hours and hours more. I really appreciate you being willing to come on and talk with us, and I'm grateful that you understand the premise of what we're trying to accomplish here. We want people to be able to know that there's other people in the world who have gone through maybe some of the things that they've gone through, and or they know someone who's going through some of the things that we talk about on these episodes. And so you've dealt with some very real life situations, and I'm grateful that you were so willing to be open about them and talk with us at length about them. And just glad to have you on today. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm very privileged to talk about it and to be here.
Well, I do appreciate your time, and I think that's going to conclude us for today. But as we tell everybody at the end of our podcast, or what I'm starting to try to tell everybody is just remember to be focused on forward and enjoy your life one step at a time. And I think I'm going to take your cat illustration with me forward. That's my gem for today. I try to find one thing. My last podcast, it was, Joshua talked about the importance of a gratitude strategy. And that's something I was already doing, but I wasn't phrasing it like that.
That's a good one. See, I didn't think of that one.
Having a gratitude strategy, finding the silver lining in everything that life throws at us. And so I was already doing that, but not phrasing it like he did. And I liked how he phrased it. And I already, kind of did the, when you talked about the cat illustration, I already kind of do that to some degree in my life with other things, but, I can find a lot of ways for that to make sense. And instead of chasing things, I'm let it follow me through. So thank you for your wisdom and your experiences.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your time. And that will conclude us today for Focused on Forward. Thank you, guys. Continue to follow us, and we look forward to hearing you the next.
Well, that concludes another episode of Focused on Forward. To be a guest of Focused on Forward, you can reach us through Twitter at podcastfof, through our Facebook page named Focused on Forward, or through email focusedonforward@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing each and every one of your stories that has yet to be told. So until then, be safe, be kind, and be loving to one another as you stay focused on forward.